lit.
Uhuru comrades, and welcome to today's Omali Taught Me Sunday Study featuring Chairman Omali Yeshitela. My name is Akile Anai, the Director of Agitation and Propaganda for the African People's Socialist Party, as well as your MC for this morning. Make sure to hit that like button and share this video on the platform that you're viewing from. This week, Chairman Omali Yeshitela continues reading from the 2022 political report to the third plenary of the party's 7th Congress, titled Relentless, 50 Years of Leadership Towards African Redemption. We'll be reviewing Chapter 5, the ASI, Africa Work, the Caribbean, and Europe. And the study materials have been linked in the Facebook and YouTube descriptions for your benefit. For the first hour, the chairman will review the study materials, and in the second hour, we'll open it up to you, our live viewers, to ask your questions. It's my honor now to introduce our leadership, the leader of the African nation and the worldwide African revolution, Chairman Omali Yeshitela. Uhuru, Chairman.
Uhuru, thank you so much, Comrade Director Akile. First of all, I want to welcome everyone here today. And I want to let everybody know, really repeating what you've already said, Director Akile, that this is the 5th chapter of the political report to the 3rd plenary of our 7th Congress. The political report has turned out to be 6 chapters long, and the last chapter, chapter 6, is something that you will have to take on yourselves independently as groups in the organization, as individuals, members of the movement, the party, and other people in general who are interested in this. We do these political reports, and we've been going over this political report on these Sundays prior to the plenary to give people an opportunity to look at it, to study it, to tweak it. In some instances, in some occasions, what we call a political report is also referred to as the main resolution. And they're sort of like the guiding document for our congresses, for our plenary, the one that members of the party, our movement have an opportunity to utilize in order to make their own, to influence their own resolutions, their own reports to the plenary conference and things like that. So we try to get this out earlier enough for people to have an opportunity to look at it, study it, to critique it, criticize it, and be prepared to discuss it at the plenary itself. We will go through this political report in its entirety during the process of the plenary, but this is something that precedes the plenary, as I've said, in order to prepare people for it. So thank you, comrades. And as I mentioned, we'll go do this again at the plenary, the entire document in one more or less fell swoop throughout the plenary. And I'm calling on you, asking you to take a look at this, look at it, study this, the sixth chapter as soon as you have an opportunity to do it prior to the plenary itself. This is chapter 5, the ASI Africa work, the Caribbean and Europe. The global presence of the African People's Socialist Party is not static. We have seen ebbs and flows in membership and in geographical spaces we occupy. But our growth is permanent. Our organization is at work and at different times with different capacities. We're in the Bahamas, Bermuda, Jamaica, Trinidad, and Guadeloupe, etc. Our presence is ubiquitous and expanding within the US. And in Europe, we are in France and England with a residual presence in Germany, Belgium, and Sweden, among other places. We are most excited by the growth of our presence and influence in Africa that includes Tanzania, South Africa, Swaziland, Uganda, Nigeria, Chad, Mali, Ghana, Sierra Leone, and other places constantly coming under our purview. We have also had organizers in Egypt, Papua New Guinea, and Australia at different times. Through utilization of the party's regional strategic approach, the party is busy building throughout the world for the greater appreciation of organizational objectives in every region. Recruitment as a most important general campaign of the party is fast becoming characteristic of party work globally. This means that everywhere in the world, our party, utilizing our standard party agenda, is constantly, permanently engaged in winning new members to our party, either directly or through mass organizations. We are consistently engaged in building party organizations, either directly as the party or indirectly as one or more of the party's mass organizations. The manifesto of the African Socialist International laid the foundation for the present party work throughout the world. Written in April 22 years ago, for a conference to build the African Socialist International held in London, the manifesto spoke unambiguously to our worldview that this plenary is galvanizing our party to implement concretely wherever we are. And here's an excerpt. The manifesto of the African Socialist International. African people throughout the world are rising up. We have entered into the new millennium in motion, struggling to overturn the 500-year legacy of oppression and exploitation to which we have been subjected by a parasitic social system born at our expense. We are fighting to reclaim our destiny as a single people whose forced dispersal in a world defined by artificial borders has served to undermine our common identity and dilute our collective strength. We are everywhere. We are in Chicago, Illinois, in Florida, Texas, California, and New York, and throughout the United States and North America, as well as Toronto and Montreal in Canada. We are in Brasilia, in Brazil, Caracas in Venezuela, Bluefields in Nicaragua, in Central and South America. We are in Trinidad, Haiti, Jamaica, Guadeloupe, Martinique, Dominica, the Bahamas, Cuba, Puerto Rico, the Dominican Republic, Barbados, and all the islands of the Caribbean. We are in London, Birmingham, Manchester, Liverpool, and Nottingham in England. We are in Paris, Lille, Lyon, Marseille, and Nice in France. We are in Brussels, Belgium, Amsterdam, Holland, Berlin, Germany, Rome, Italy, as well as Spain, Portugal, Russia, Turkey, and all of Eastern Europe. We reside in the hundreds of millions in our ancient motherland, which was the birthplace of humankind more than 150,000 years ago, and which served as the cradle of human civilization more than 10,000 years ago. The life and historical experience of our people over the last 500 years constitute the primary force that has given shape to the modern world. It is a world where the vast majority of the people of the planet Earth are living in starvation, misery, disease, ignorance, and terror. At the same time, Europe and North America control the world's wealth at gunpoint and rest upon the prostrate, bloody, and abscessed backs of the workers and peasants of Africa, Asia, and Latin America. The world capitalist economy began with Europe's assault on our Africa and the kidnapping, captivity, colonial enslavement, and dispersal of African people throughout what is now known as the Americas. This barbaric assault upon African people depopulated our motherland of hundreds of millions of human beings. It destroyed our ancient civilization, and it unleashed a European wave of mass murder, that killed hundreds of millions of human beings through slave raiding wars. It left a trail of human carnage over the middle passage of the Atlantic Ocean and condemned the captive African people of the Americas to death through torture, miserable toil, and cultural annihilation. This initial assault upon Africa, along with the genocidal extermination of the indigenous peoples of the Americas and the looting of Asia and the Middle East, has lifted Europe out of millennia of disease, poverty, fratricidal warfare, and mass murder. Europe's militarism and aggression was part of a culture whose economic base was built upon warfare and conquest between competing European tribes and kingdoms. Before this, there was no concept of Europe or white people as a monolithic group. Europe's nation states and continental unity were forged through its assault upon the world's peoples. This unity was consolidated through the conquest, invasion, enslavement of the peoples of Asia, and the carving up of the African continent by European colonial powers in the 19th century. Today, 1 billion African people throughout the world are engaged in a desperate struggle for survival within a world whose economic foundations were built upon the theft of our labor and resources. African people comprise half of the world's population that lives on less than $2 a day. We are subjected to genocidal biological warfare through the use of AIDS, Ebola, and other often curable diseases, some of which have been manufactured for our destruction. Today, our motherland is undergoing a frenzy of rape and looting more intense and insidious than slavery. This takes the form of trade and so-called debt, which brings development to Europe, North America, and increasingly Japan, while it commits mass murder against our people through artificial famine and the transformation of our homeland into an economic wasteland. However, we continue to struggle and we will win. The historic experience of African people throughout the world has forged our people into a revolutionary nation comprised primarily of workers and poor peasants. We continue to form the critical army of labor for world imperialism in the mines of Congo, South Africa, and Zambia, in the plantations and farms of Ghana and Ivory Coast, the Caribbean, in the factories of Detroit, Manchester, Lyon, and Brussels, as well as the hundreds of prison dungeons throughout the world, including those that hold 1 million African people captive in the United States of North America. Included among this massive force of African workers are the hundreds of millions of unemployed African laborers who constitute a massive reserve of labor or labor pool for imperialism. Hunger and starvation are used as weapons of economic warfare aimed at suppressing the value of African labor power. Moreover, this labor force is to work day and night and to migrate from country to country and continent to continent just to eat. The laws that govern nature and the entire universe necessitates life and death and determines the rise of the new and the vanquishing of the old in an infinitely unfolding struggle between opposing forces. In the same way, we know that the resurrection of Africa and African people is inevitable and it cannot be stopped. The liberation of Africa will be brought about through the coming worldwide upheaval of African workers and poor peasants, a sleeping giant poised to seize our freedom, happiness, and wealth from imperialist white power and deal it the death blow the world's people are awaiting Africa to strike. This awakening of African workers will constitute an African revolution that will consolidate our national consciousness, culture, and identity through mass struggle on an international scale. It will constitute the final offensive against imperialism and white power, which will have nowhere left to run as the oppressed hundreds of millions of African workers and poor peasants consciously pursue our historic mission of the total unification of the African continent and African people throughout the world. Never again will we allow people to be slaves or to be divided by languages, ethnic grouping, false borders, or false micro-nationalities. This awakening African people stand at the vanguard of the struggle of the world's oppressed people to build a new world in which the currently endured humiliation, famine, terror, and disease becomes a distant, faded memory. We believe that it is only fitting that the people who gave birth to world civilization and who are the primary victims of the barbarism that has established harmony throughout the world, take responsibility that we believe that it is only fitting that the people who gave birth to world civilization and who are the primary victims of the barbarism that has established hegemony throughout the world take responsibility for leading the struggle for liberation of the majority of the planet from the tyranny and despotism of US-led world imperialism. Brothers and sisters, the hour of Africa's redemption, which the great Marcus Garvey so prophetically envisioned many years ago, is upon us. We must build the African Socialist International and unite our dispersed, oppressed, and 1 billion strong African nation under the slogan, touch one, touch all. We must build the ASI under the leadership of the African workers aligned with the poor peasantry, for it is they who are the creators of social wealth and value. It is they who are the only social force capable of waging our liberation struggle to its victorious conclusion. African workers and peasants must assume the leadership of our society as a condition for our freedom, unquote. So the ASI is our only means to end the death grip of colonialism. The African Socialist International is the only means by which Africa will liberate itself from the death grip of the colonial mode of production, having been brought into existence through the colonial enslavement of African people. The colonial mode of production is facilitated by the forced division of Africa into illegitimate countries, sometimes called nations, further separating Africans from each other and alienating us from our own national homeland. The first such alienation in the process of birthing the capitalist system occurred with the colonial enslavement and forced dispersal of Africans throughout the world. This is what consolidated the colonial mode of production that would be called capitalism. Herein lies the foundation of the existing global economy that created Europe, providing the basis for Europe's conditional unification and relative prosperity within a parasitic economic relationship defined by the unity of opposites of colonized versus colonizer. This is a relationship that cannot be reformed to the benefit of the colonized. The survival of the system requires the permanent brutal oppression of the colonized. The colonial mode of production, whether dominated by so-called Americans, Russians, Chinese, etc., requires colonialism as a condition for its survival. By that, I mean the colonialism that dominates Africa is especially and specifically critical for its survival. It should be clear then that the African Socialist International is the correct strategic approach to win African liberation. We, Africans, are our own liberators. The entire African continent is experiencing violent instability. Not only is Africa divided by artificial, colonially created borders and the social and economic consequences of such forced division, Africa is also divided by the selfish petty bourgeois aspirations forced by economic life incubated within artificial colonial serving borders. The Africa inherited through European defined independence is an Africa formerly abandoned by European colonizers who created no infrastructure except that which facilitated the theft of African resources. No roads or railways, no buildings, no power supplies, no clean water sources, no hospitals or African serving schools and universities, just holes in the ground for bringing out African resources and occasional railroad tracks and avenues for bringing Africa's resources to European profit-making sources within the colonial mode of production. Life for the colonizer, death for the colonized, wealth for the colonizer, poverty and starvation for the colonized. Instability was brought home to South Africa in July of 2021, when thousands of Africans were driven by enhanced poverty and neocolonial state brutality to rise up against the settler neocolonial state. And although our growing party and movement took up our responsibility to intervene politically in the uprising with African internationalist science, we are still building our strength to become the determining political force. We are barely present in Cameroon, where internecine fighting continues between French and English-speaking Africans in a territory that had been formerly colonized by Germany, who lost it to France and England after Germany lost the First Imperialist World War by Europeans to divide the world. This gift of African territory and people to France and England was one of the acts of the League of Nations, the UN predecessor. Such acts by the League of Nations in 1919 contributed to Marcus Garvey's declaration, Africa for Africans at home and abroad. The fight among Africans in this territory, named for the Portuguese word for shrimp, are a consequence of European colonialism and artificial borders that frustrate the development of a united African national consciousness. Burkina Faso, Eswatini, Democratic Republic of Congo, Nigeria, Ethiopia, Chad, Nigeria, etc., are among the outstanding examples of current violence that owe their existence to the colonial mode of production. But the truth is, it would be a mistake to address the political violence, oppression, disease, and poverty as particular to any one place in Africa. It is endemic. All of Africa, without exception, suffers from similar conditions or are on the precipice of such. Africa will never know genuine freedom from the existing cruel conditions of existence without revolution that liberates every square inch of Africa. The international African working class is the only social force that must win the total liberation of Africa in order to achieve this liberation. Only the African working class, aligned with the poor peasantry, cannot have its material interests satisfied without the total liberation of Africa under an all-African revolutionary government of its advanced detachment. Moreover, Africa cannot be united and liberated without access to all its conscious advanced forces globally. There is not going to be any sustainable revolution within any of the neocolonial territories that were created to meet the requirements of Europe within the colonial mode of production, nor will African liberation come as a consequence of training colonial patrons of the United States and or Europe for Chinese, Russian, Turkish, or any other colonial country within the colonial mode of production. On the continent of Africa, the victory of our colonial oppressors was codified through the instrument of the imperialist-supported colonial capitalist superstructure represented in the creation of the Organization of African Unity, the OAU. Despite the heroic efforts of Kwame Nkrumah to forward the initiative of Marcus Garvey for African liberation and unification that influenced Nkrumah's political development, the 1963 founded OAU within the colonial mode of production actually codified the colonial borders. The OAU gave the colonially imposed borders a legitimacy they never had before and facilitated the development of a political economy of servitude that continues to function despite the change of name to the African Unity. The defeat of the Black Revolution of the 1960s was a signal moment in the struggle of our people to re-achieve our freedom and dignity from the humiliating domination by foreigners and aliens that we know as colonialism. This is one reason we understand the founding and work of our party over the last 50 years to be the font within which the uninterrupted history of our African liberation struggle is located. This third plenary recognizes that truth. Moreover, with the notable exception of Kwame Nkrumah's efforts, the African People's Socialist Party is also the only organization that has pursued the total liberation and redemption of Africa since the all-African anti-colonial movement founded by Marcus Garvey a little more than 100 years ago. The whole of Africa is in a state of colonial-derived chaos. There is no exception. All indicators of stability and normality are illusory. Because of the hundreds of years of looting Africa's human and material resources and maintaining the colonial umbilical cord that sustains the life of Europe and the colonial mode of production at Africa's expense, Africa's wretchedness is to be expected. The 1415 Portuguese initiation of the European transatlantic trade in African Black bodies opened the door to a mode of production that has rescued and inchoate Europe from its feudal mode of production at African expense. The process of colonial slavery and oppression for African human and material resources created a new world order revolving around the forcible extraction of value from Africa and other peoples. We refer to this new world order, the one replacing European feudalism, as a colonial mode of production. After several hundred years of brutal, direct European exploitation, Europe conferred its definition of independence on Africa by transferring Europe's direct control to management of the resource transferring system to Africans locked into European employment by the system created for that purpose. Today, this form of indirect rule is referred to as neocolonialism. Like our golden resources, African culture has been stolen by the colonizers. Our party understands that the conditions of existence of African people are globally connected to the initial attack on Africa by Europe. This attack that initiated the colonial mode of production locked Africa into servitude to a Europe that was achieving basic unity through collective benefit of looting Africa, of everything. When we say everything, we do so recognizing that the scores of millions, and some say hundreds of millions, of African people brought our culture with us in the process. When some would deny the existence of African culture among Africans in the US or elsewhere, it is because they refuse to recognize that African culture is ubiquitous as are African people. While African culture may not always be recognized as such, it is only because our culture, like our bodies and our coltan, gold, and other material resources were colonized and recharacterized as belonging to the colonizer, who has actually only exhibited a culture of violence on his own. We also recognize that we are one people whose common identity sometimes goes unrecognized because globally we exist and struggle within colonially created borders. But the fact is that it was not only our bodies and culture that were forcibly imported to foreign lands in the process of creating the colonial mode of production. Our conditions of colonial oppression were also exported. This is why wherever we are in the world as Africans, our conditions of existence are the same with a little deviation. Also, we accept the reality that African colonial slavery established the ideological so-called racial terms for oppressing Black people globally within the colonial mode of production. This is true whether these Black people were victims of the initial European colonial onslaught on Africa, or whether they several areas of the world previously uninhabited by Europeans thousands of years before the invention of Europeans. Australia, New Caledonia, West Papua, etc., are just some of the glaring examples of our people being subjected to oppression that is overlooked, excused, or justified because of their Blackness, a fundamental characteristic of the African nation. The fact is that there is no solution for Africa and the world when African liberation is contained to the restricting borders created by our colonizers for their benefit. Nor can we allow our identity as a people to remain in colonial captivity. We must build the African cultural revolution. We have spoken for many years in general terms about the responsibility the ASI has to spread African internationalist philosophy as a primary strategic task for forwarding the African liberation struggle. However, 5 years ago in 2017, at the third plenary of our sixth Congress, we quoted from an even earlier plenary report about this important task. I'm going to quote from this political report because it gives a concrete assignment to all the forces within the ASI. And this is the quote from 2017. Throughout the Americas, our people also suffer an identity crisis that stems from a false national consciousness that has no material foundation. We exist in a form of identity purgatory, neither one thing nor the other, all hyphenated identities that never sufficiently explain our poverty and desperate conditions of existence. We are Africans, period. The ASI must wage a major campaign within the African world, a cultural revolution of sorts. We must wage this campaign in a manner that reveals the heroism and critical role of African workers and peasants, the toiling masses. Our cultural revolution must extol the producers, the workers, the creators of all value, and a need for a new society that reinstates the authority of the workers, and especially African women from the producing class, who are central to all production and society itself. Many Africans have long recognized the need for Africans abroad, colonizing countries outside of Africa, to recognize ourselves as Africans. But the truth is that such recognition is an absolute must for Africans on the continent as well. This has major implications for our African national consciousness. This cultural revolution would make it impossible for Africans to be thrust into fratricidal war with each other framed by colonial linguistic differences, as in Cameroon, itself a colonial contrivance. The war in Ethiopia, currently being trumped up as having been caused by ethnic differences, has the colonizers salivating at the possibility of another war-created, ill-formed African breakaway colonial state. This will be impossible when Africans everywhere are won back to an understanding that we have one primary identity among any other. That primary identity is African. Like Africans in Europe, the Caribbean, the US, and the Asia Pacific region, Africans at home in Africa must also be made aware of the fact that we are not minorities anywhere, but part of a dispersed nation of more than 1.5 billion Africans with the power to determine the liberated future of the world. The party's initiation of this ideological struggle, this cultural revolution by Africans throughout the world, will have a powerful psychological impact on the willingness of Africans to fight, and the necessity for the world to recognize our people and struggle as being about more than begging favorable integration into the colonial mode of production that requires our permanent enslavement as a condition for its existence. Our Department of Agitation and Propaganda must concentrate our Department of Agitprop must concentrate on developing this cultural revolution and initiating it throughout all our structures. All our regional leaders, especially but not exclusively in Africa, must develop and implement plans of action to make and win this cultural revolution. As part of our strategy for taking power anywhere in the world must include waging this fierce cultural revolution. Wherever we take power, it must be recognized as African power under the leadership of the African working class. All Africans everywhere must be won to understand that we are not alone, contained within the colonial created borders in which we live. We are everywhere, and we recognize that what often appears to be an African disadvantage is the fact that our conditions of existence are measured by those of colonial predators whose apparent wealth stem from the nature of a parasitic system brought into existence through our colonial enslavement. This is not a new discussion, although it has taken on new significance now because of the advances we have made in the work to build the African People's Socialist Party globally. We have talked about the history of this ASI building process in a number of political reports. In the 2017 political reports, we even spoke confidently on what a liberated Africa and African socialist worker state we are achieving will look like. We described the liberated African worker state in the political report to the 2017 party plenary. And here's a quote from 5 years ago. The demand by African people for national liberation is a demand that recognizes the fact that we are colonized, that the African nation as a whole lives under foreign domination. We have been waging this concerted struggle for 600 years since the Portuguese invasion that initiated the capture and enslavement of African people in 1415. Because the African nation has been forcibly dispersed throughout the world, the struggle for national liberation has naturally traveled with us as part of the process that gave rise to the capitalist system as a worldwide system. The concentrated, self-conscious struggle for African national liberation reached its apex under the leadership of Marcus Garvey and the Universal Negro Improvement Association and African Communities League in the first quarter of the 20th century, informed by the slogan, Africa for Africans at home and abroad. What will liberated Africa looks like. Since that time, after many setbacks, serious class-based battles within the African community and the establishment of neocolonialism as a generalized condition for African people, we are forced to look beyond national liberation to the question of the kind of society we are fighting for and to identify the social forces necessary to achieve it. Africa, Africans, a once free people existing within our own independent economies in Africa, have been transformed into commodities, first capital, and producers of capital, first workers, within a social system defined by the relationship between capitalist production and producers, resting on a foundation of slavery and colonial domination of peoples and territories. National liberation served the purpose of freeing Africans from direct foreign domination. However, direct foreign domination is not necessary for vicious, life-draining economic exploitation, either by foreign or domestic capital. National liberation under the leadership of the African petty bourgeoisie leaves in place a system of exploitation. African toilers, producers, continue to be exploited under the aegis of a domestic flag, maybe as in Libya today, a red, black, and green flag. To be victorious, our revolution must take place under the leadership of the African working class. This is the role of the African People's Socialist Party, the advanced detachment, general staff of the African working class. Only the African working class, aligned with other toilers, especially the poor peasants, has a stake in destroying the entire system of exploitation and all of its attendant structures, including the artificial borders that exploit Africa, but function as the incubators for the reproduction of the neocolonial petty bourgeois class as a social force. Only the African working class is compelled to fight for the destruction of class society and the exploitation that produces it. Under the independent revolutionary leadership of the African working class, organized under African internationalist principles, victory will mean the defeat of foreign imperialists and their domestic minions. It will mean that the toilers, the workers and poor peasants in particular, will become the new temporary ruling class, the custodians of the means of production now owned and controlled by capitalists, mostly foreign. Liberation under the leadership of African internationalists and foreign workers, organized in the African People's Socialist Party, will mean the end of economic exploitation. And once the imperialists and African petty bourgeois neocolonialists have been crushed, the end of all exploitation. This means that African women who will play a fundamental role in the liberation of our Africa will rise to full stature with all the rights and authority this infers. This means a major assault will be made against all restrictions on the rights of women that hide under the flimsy and in most cases false mask of tradition. Nor will African liberation under the leadership of the African working class tolerate social, economic, and political oppression of sectors of the African nation and working class because of spurious bourgeois morality. We condemn the morality and relations that permit Europeans, white people, imperialist corporations, countries, and neocolonial thugs to exploit our people's life and resources in Africa and to flaunt laws protecting sovereignty, the environment, and custom with impunity while attacking African people and the working class based on sexual orientation or relations between same gender-loving individuals. The liberated African worker state will only oppress the imperialists and the neocolonialists who have surrendered Africa's future to them. We will call on the entire African working class and all African patriots to rise up against all who would divide the nation and the working class based on the false contradictions of sexual identity, ethnic identity, and regional and religious differences. The African revolution that liberates and unites Africa and African people under African internationalism, the organized, conscious, and victorious leadership of the African working class will be the death knell of imperialist white power and capitalism as a world economy. It will finally allow for the African workers to take social possession of the means of production. Our victory will mean the entire process of production, mining, building, manufacturing, shipping, distribution, etc., will occur through workers' councils throughout the production process. This will guarantee safety and creativity throughout. Workers will not improve going into mines that are unsafe, and improvement of the productive process will not be motivated by profit that has no regard for safety and proficiency otherwise, but by the needs and aspirations of workers as producers and consumers. Additionally, because the state of the African economy, smothered by the whims and requirements of imperialist white power, has minimal industrial development, much of the lackluster economic life is centered in the countryside. The African Internationalist Revolution will be the first major step in the world in resolving the contradiction between the city and countryside. The full, rapid development of Africa will require. We will have to reorganize the African economy, destroying all borders into a full-fledged anti-colonial economy. Today's economic activity in Africa is tied to the interests of foreign imperialist exploiters. Every bit of food grown or not grown, every factory, every decision to develop a diamond, gold, iron, or bauxite mine instead of production that satisfies our needs is imperialist driven. It has been the imperialist driven economy that has driven so many African men, women, and children from the artificially created cruel conditions of the countryside into unsanitary and overcrowded cultural crushing cities. The African working class, as a transitory ruling class, will organize production based on the real needs of the people rather than the contrived profit-driven and profit-motivated needs of the capitalists. Collective housing, neighborhood councils with the power to solve domestic problems, efficient public transportation, African educational systems, illiteracy eradication campaigns, centers for music, cultural development, and socializing, birthing programs, and socialist care for our elderly, time and centers for reflection, revolutionary rehabilitation programs, barefoot doctors deployed into the community as in China and as in Cuba. Places where lovers can go for privacy will become ordinary features of life, overturning the horrible day-to-day grind that characterizes our reality today. Even the form of the family will be reorganized under the dictatorship of the African worker state. It will allow adults to enter into agreements of relationship that are free from economic compulsion. Women will be assured economic independence, so financial duress would not be a factor that determines their commitment to a relationship nor enslaves their emotions. The immediate role of the African worker state will be to function as a protector of society against incestuous, exploitative, and oppressive relationships and their consequences. African men and women can determine whatever arrangements they contract among themselves, with the state functioning as arbiter only until the time when the rule of habit and tradition overturns the rule of the state that becomes unnecessary in human affairs. Our party also has a deep commitment to the well-being of our African children, recognizing that under the system of parasitic capitalism, our children live with daily trauma. They are demeaned, locked up, and gunned down by colonial police and tormented in the white school system. The APSP follows in the footsteps of the African Revolution of Haiti, whose victory in 1804 produced a progressive constitution that for the first time in history abolished all notions of an illegitimate child and pledged a commitment to the nurturing and protection of every child. The African adage declaring the role of the village in raising a child will be given new life. Women will be freed from the burden as isolated individual primary child caregivers. The family now becomes the society in a relationship that has the force of law and collective resources of the people that have been liberated from their role as surplus under private ownership within the capitalist system. This means the institution of state-funded and administered nurseries and childcare collectives that benefit parents and children in a manner that could never happen under colonial capitalist society developed through the commodification of African parents and children. Parents in the community at large will be able to engage in a stress-free, non-competitive relationship with our children. The African Internationalist liberation and unification of Africa and Africans worldwide will be a major blow to destroy the entire capitalist system that was an outgrowth of colonialism. It will be the fundamental instrument in the emergence of world socialism, providing the defining direction for the world economy. The achievement of African international socialism will be the essential force in the achievement of permanent world peace, easily understood when it is recognized that most wars are fought by states contending with each other and with peoples for profit generation, markets, and resources. We will replace capitalist competition with socialist cooperation, something not possible before now. The African Socialist Workers' State. Le Duan was Secretary General of the Communist Party in Vietnam with the responsibility of delivering the political report to their fourth Congress in late December of 1976. In this political report, Le Duan spoke of the possibilities of the socialist workers' state after the conquest of national liberation. Quoting now that our motherland has recovered complete independence, says Le Duan, national independence and socialism have become one. Le Duan continued, only under socialism can the age-old dream of the working people come true, i.e. liberation from oppression, exploitation, poverty, and backwardness, a life in plenty with an assured tomorrow, a civilized and happy life. Only socialism can bring to the working people the full right to mastery and restore genuine human dignity to man, enabling him to be the real master of society, of nature, and of himself. Under socialism, our motherland will have a modern economy, advanced culture and science, strong national defense, thereby ensuring our country's eternal independence, freedom, and ever more prosperous development. Only socialism can bring about the unification of our motherland at the highest and fullest degree in the fields of territory, political and moral life, economy, culture, society, as well as in the field of rights and duties, thereby fostering the solidarity and sincere and deep mutual love between all members of society. And then that was Le Duan. And then we say there will be no forced idleness under post-liberated socialist construction in Africa and abroad. The work to build adequate infrastructure, housing and schools, to electrify our cities and countryside, to grow food and purify our water and eradicate disease and the deadly mosquito are just some of the tasks guaranteed to offer full employment for our people for years to come. This is productive labor that serves the people instead of bourgeois profit. This is productive labor that cannot happen under colonialist capitalism that grinds down and demoralizes the worker and humiliates the African colonial subject. Capitalist production functions on the basis of stolen lands and peoples. It is production that only pays workers and toilers for their ability to produce, never for what we produce. The difference in the two is what capitalists refer to as surplus or value or profit. The capitalist keeps this surplus for himself, though he never works or produces anything. The African worker state can only come into existence by the workers destroying the colonial base of capitalist production, replacing the oppressive state of the colonialist capitalist and transforming surplus value into social wealth to provide for the well-being of society. This is how the African worker state will provide free healthcare, education, housing, childcare, etc. for the toiling masses through expropriating the stolen resources from the colonialist capitalists, destroying the system of private ownership of social production and creating a system of social ownership of social production. In a word, socialism, the early stage of communism. This is the new world we are fighting for in this party. It is not a world to be achieved through reforming police departments or improving police community relations within the US or anywhere else. It is not something that can be achieved by a $15 per hour minimum wage for workers in general over a period of years. We will have to make a revolution under the leadership of the advanced attachment of the African working class, guided by the advanced theory of African internationalism to initiate the world free from economic slavery and colonial oppression. This is why we must fight to put revolution on the political agenda for our people once again. Our recognition of the role played by imperialist parasitism in the advent of the capitalist system as the world system also gave the African People's Socialist Party an understanding of the nature of the capitalist state as distinguished from the European feudal state that preceded it. Most white socialists and many progressives recognize the state as a coercive instrument in the service of the ruling class that is necessary to protect the status quo from disruption and overthrow by exploited classes and to compete with capitalists internationally for profit at their expense. However, unlike other states in history, the capitalist state did not come into existence for the purpose of protecting a domestic social system. It was organized to deal with the reorganization of the world's political economy that came into being as capitalism, required the dispossession and enslavement of Africans in much of the world previously external to Europe. The initial acts that gave birth, shape, and definition to the capitalist state was killing and controlling indigenous peoples, stealing and occupying foreign territories, and capturing, forcibly dispersing and enslaving African people in Africa and abroad. The capitalist state rose in contention with the feudal state of Europe. In short order, it became a popular white people's state that employed enthusiastic and willing masses of white people as a form of institutionalized emergent state violence used to kill and take land from the indigenous peoples of what is now North America and Australia, and to enslave Africans and others worldwide. In fact, part of the much touted progress of capitalism was its elevation of ordinary white people to the status of landowners on stolen land and workers in a slave-developed economy. This was the economic incentive for white men scalping indigenous people in the Americas, slaughtering indigenous people in Australia and Africa, and waging an independent struggle against European feudal states to steal indigenous lands throughout South America. The brutality of the capitalist state against Africans within the US and elsewhere, the viciousness of the capitalist state in subduing African, indigenous, Asians, and other people is not an anomaly. It is inherent to its nature and consistent with its genesis as a state protecting a social system rooted in colonial slavery. While the capitalist state is a coercive institution that sometimes mistreats, jails, and even shoots its European citizens who get caught in its friendly fire, its primary purpose is the violent suppression of the colonized population. As African internationalism has explained, white people function as part of the capitalist state. In its treatment of Africans, Mexicans, the indigenous, etc., its true function as a colonial state is raw and exposed. The purpose of the US state is to contain the other, the colonial pedestal upon which all capitalist activity occurs and which benefits the entire colonizer population. This is why in all European-controlled countries, white citizens are generally united with efforts of the state to crush any form of African and colonial resistance. It is true that democracy is a form of the state. However, for the colonized, the pursuit of democracy is a struggle to limit and eliminate the intervention of the colonial state in their lives and affairs. This is why our party has raised the demand for Black community control of the police in the popular struggle against police murder in the US. This is why we have instituted numerous African people's tribunals to try and judge colonial aggression against our people, whether for reparations or police murders. Our pursuit of genuine freedom, which can only come about through the total liberation and unification of every square inch of Africa and African people worldwide, the African nation, can only come about through revolution. By this, we mean that the colonialist capitalist state must be overthrown and the blight of the capitalist system eradicated from the face of the earth, unquote. This, by the way, is an unspoken aspect contained in the fears of restlessness discussed at the colonial capitalist bourgeois Munich Security Conference in 2020 and quoted from in chapter 3 on the crisis of imperialism. This plenary, by the way, is the party's acknowledgement of our work to guarantee a state of restlessness through the liberation and redemption of Africa and our people. Build a regional strategy throughout Africa, Europe, and the Caribbean. The tasks and assignments we are discussing for this 2022 plenary are implicit in last year's political report. Some must be quoted here to keep us on task and to elaborate on our capacity and will to carry out the cultural revolution and other assignments associated with the African Socialist International. And we are quoting from the 2000, we are quoting here. We are everywhere. African people in our vanguard party. African internationalism is a theory of practice requiring active intervention in life. The cumulative activity of the party globally is having a profound effect on our struggle for the liberation and unification of Africa and African people under the leadership of the party. The advanced detachment of our colonized nation and brutally oppressed, indefatigable ruling class, working class. The solidity of the African nation is being won and led through the political work of our party globally. This is actively exacerbating the instability, general crisis, and decline of the colonial capitalist social system. Africa was crucial to the emergence of the colonial capitalist system and is necessary for its ongoing capacity. While more and more predators are being drawn into the life-expecting economic fray, fighting to continue bleeding the colonized, the growing influence of the African People's Socialist Party continues to deepen the imperialist crisis. Clearly, we are winning. The African Socialist International is on the ground in Africa. The work of Secretary General Louise Kinshasa is rapidly pushing this process forward. After many years of struggles and ups and downs, it is impossible to say too much about the steady and patient leadership that Comrade Louise has provided for the development of the ASI with work throughout Europe and on the continent of Africa itself. The significance of our foothold in occupied Tanzania, or South Africa, as it is known by its colonial name, cannot be exaggerated. Ruling class media do not report on our work because they create a conventional perception that all events will be measured by the electoral process established by the white colonizers. For them, like most global observers, it is the sometimes militant activism that flares up within the neocolonial capitalist state electoral system that is the critical determinant factor. Our party has always recognized that African people, organized under the independent leadership of the advanced detachment of the working class, will decide the future of our people and nation, not the neocolonialist capitalist democratic electoral system, unquote. The adoption and development of the party's regional strategy is the most important general campaign of the party globally. It signifies that our party work around the world is, among other things, designed to build the party in every region of the world in a measurable way. In Africa, our party leader, Comrade Tafari Mugere, Director of Organization for the Continent of Africa, as well as the chairman of the African People's Socialist Party, occupied Tanzania, must move beyond treating all Africa as a region and begin the process of developing the African regional committees based on the physical territory within which they are located and under the leadership of regional representatives or chairs. I know that Comrade Tafari is cautious because of ideological limitations and political experience of many of the comrades coming into the party in Africa, and I am not suggesting that he should not be. I am suggesting, however, that Chairman Tafari strengthen his own office and establish a plan of action consciously designed to escalate the level of political and ideological development of our forces. Additionally, Comrade Tafari must not hesitate to utilize the party's mass organizations where necessary and appropriate for holding potential party forces in our embrace as they are being prepared for full party participation. Along with Comrade Deputy Chairwoman Onazene and other comrades on the continent, Comrade Tafari must also make a solid determination of whether it will be possible to fully initiate the planned garment factory in South Africa. I know that we do have a certain capacity in Ghana, and Comrade Tafari, with assistance from Deputy Chairwoman Onazene, may find it necessary to develop a plan of action for placing the garment factory in Ghana, keeping in mind some of the organizational limitations we have there. To be clear, our ASI work everywhere must fully use the regional strategy. It must create functioning regional committees with the responsibility for building the party in every state, province, city, and community in every country. The The regional strategy must build recruitment into its work as called for by the party structure. This has special significance for our party work in Europe and the Caribbean. ASI Secretary General Comrade Louis Kinshasa has played a crucial role in helping to get the party established in Europe. It was through his leadership that the party has a presence throughout that continent. Comrade Louis has traveled everywhere, helping to establish the party at different times in France, England, Belgium, Sweden, Germany, etc. It was a dynamic party presence that also affected our presence in Africa. Entering our third plenary of our seventh Congress, it is necessary to recapture the past dynamism of our Europe work on a much higher level. We have to go beyond simply having party organizations that engage in certain kinds of work in different countries. Comrade Secretary General Louis must see that our European regional representative works with a plan of action and is held accountable to actually build the party and our constituent organizations, recruiting Africans into the party or under the leadership of the party. Secretary General Louis is highly recognized throughout the party and our movement for his brilliant ideological work propagating African internationalism throughout Europe and the world. However, what is needed now, more than just ideological work, is party organization that provides the foundation for the unity of theory and practice, party organizational practice. To be clear, our ASI Africa work overseen by Secretary General Louis must adopt a regional strategy. It must implement verifiable work to win all Africans in the various regions to conscious support of the party and the best of them into the ranks of our party. Similarly, the Caribbean regional work must be consolidated according to organizational principles of the party and the regional strategy. We have a presence in Bermuda, the Bahamas, Jamaica, and Guadeloupe with different degrees of effectiveness. We must hold the Caribbean work to the same non-liberal standards as every other region. There must be a viable Caribbean regional committee that has assumed the active, verifiable responsibility for organizing the party and our constituent organizations throughout the region. The task is the same. Win Africans in the region to conscious support of the party and the best of them into the party itself. These are things that can and must be measured concretely. Our regional committee meetings and overall ASI leadership committee, functioning according to party organizational principles, using our standard party agenda. Another of the most important general campaigns of the party that must be taken up by this work, along with recruitment, implementation of the regional strategy, celebrating the party's 50th anniversary, partially with this plenary and 2022 African Liberation Day, is the 8th Party Congress scheduled for South Africa for October 6th through 20th, 2023. More than anything, this 8th Congress signals the liberation and redemption of our people and our Africa. This will be the first time since the UNIA of Marcus Garvey that Africans will be coming together to put the final touches on the final offensive to overturn the colonial mode of production that enslaved the world in various ways. We must bring thousands of Africans from our forcibly dispersed nation in every area of the world. This is the task of our party, and our answer to the question suggested in this statement of Marcus Garvey 100 years ago. Quote, "No one knows when the hour of Africa's redemption cometh. It is in the wind. It is coming. One day like a storm, it will be here," unquote. The work of our party, as exemplified by this, our third plenary of our 7th Congress, is our statement that we are winning and the redemption of Africa is nigh. Ease relate to the Africa. So, Comrade Director.
Uhuru, Chairman, wow, what a profound chapter to close off this series of studies with. And as you mentioned, if you want to catch chapter 6, you will have to attend the party's plenary coming up next weekend, but really want to salute this chapter, your leadership over the past 50 years to carry out the work, the vision of Marcus Garvey, and just carrying on the history of the African liberation struggle, and just saluting the comrades who in Africa and throughout the regions discussed in this report, who are going to be responsible for carrying what you have laid out in this political report. So really, really appreciate this study and you just laying out this incredible vision. I know that what will liberated Africa look like has been something you've laid out, over the years. And I really appreciate you always bringing us back to that, because, that's ultimately everything that we're fighting for, is that vision, what's established there. And it is possible to achieve in our lifetime. So just really want to salute this study, your leadership, Chairman. It has been incredibly profound. And we're about to go into the questions and answer portion. So you guys type in those questions into the chat if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube. And before we go into questions, we do have our announcements. So let's get into those. If we could get those posted up. All right. So this study is being brought to you by the Department of Agitation and Propaganda, where we're winning the war of ideas. For your worldwide revolutionary news and analysis, you can visit theburningspear.com. You can get more political education from Chairman Omali Yeshitela in every issue of the Burning Spear newspaper. Become a subscriber today. Get a 1-year subscription, 12 issues delivered straight to your door or email inbox for $25. You can gift a subscription to comrades and family members and sponsor a prisoner. You can do all of this at theburningspear.com/subscribe. Calling on Spear distributors, the February Spear is here. Get the Spear out into your community. Order your bundles today at burningspearmarketplace.com. Omali Taught Me airs on Black Power 96 FM radio, a project of the African People's Education and Defense Fund, with the slogan, not just explaining the world, but changing it. Listen on 96.3 FM in St. Petersburg, Florida, or streaming online at blackpower96.org and on the free Black Power 96 mobile app. The theory of African internationalism is a theory of practice. All of the energy of the African People's Socialist Party is focused on the destruction of colonial capitalism. Africans of the world, go to our website, apspuhuru.org, and fill out our contact form. Celebrate African History Month with Uhuru Furniture. Top quality, low price, gently used furniture, African posters, pillows, gifts, and home decor. Uhuru Furniture is an economic self-determination project of the African People's Education and Defense Fund. They have weekly live shows featuring friends of Uhuru, showing the newest great finds. Uhuru Furniture Philly is offering 15% off store-wide and buy one, get one free lamps, pictures, mirrors, and single chairs through February 28th. Open Wednesday through Sunday, 11 a.m. to 6 p.m. Located at 832 North Broad Street in Philadelphia. Call 215-546-9616 or visit the website uhurufurniturephilly.blogspot.com. And Uhuru Furniture Oakland is offering buy one, get one 20% off for all furniture, lamps, mirrors, and rugs now through February 28th. Open Wednesday through Sunday from 12 noon to 6 p.m. located at 3742 Grand Ave in Oakland. Or you can browse the inventory online 24/7 at uhurufurniture.blogspot.com. Calling on all party and Uhuru movement members and supporters, next week, attend the 2022 Plenary Conference of the African People's Socialist Party, February 11th through the 14th. The theme of this year's plenary is Relentless, 50 Years of Leadership Toward African Redemption. The conference is four full days packed with Chairman Omali Yeshitela's 2022 political report, speakers, workshops, and reports from the party's departments, mass organizations, and economic institutions. There will also be short films showcasing the 50-year history of party cultural performance of history of the party, cultural performances, awards, and more. Registration costs just $25. View the full program schedule and register at apspplenary.org. The Black Student Union at Long Beach State University is hosting the 41st Annual Black Consciousness Conference, scheduled for February 19th. The conference is themed Theory and Practice, Revolutionizing the African Diaspora. The goal of this conference is to emphasize the importance of theory and why it should inform our collective efforts as African people across the diaspora. Speaking at this event will be APSP Agitprop Director, myself, Akile Anai. Admission is free. Check theburningspear.com/events for Eventbrite details. The All African Peoples Development and Empowerment Project's Mental Health Committee is announcing the next, next slide, please, thank you. Announcing the next IR Resistance Circle on Friday, February 25th at 7 p.m. Central via Zoom. This month's topic is Colonialism is Bad for Your Health. We will discuss how every health condition African people face today is caused by colonial domination and capitalist tactics from the quote unquote health industry. Register today at tinyurl.com/AYA register, or for more information, go to developmentforafrica.org/mental health. On March 18th to the 20th, the Uhuru Solidarity Movement will host its annual national convention titled Unity Through Reparations, Reparations Through Organization. Keynote presentations include from Chairman Omali Yeshitela and African People's Solidarity Committee Chairwoman Penny Hess. This convention will win white people to understand that their responsibility, their interests, and their future is found in the revolutionary anti-colonial struggle for reparations to African people. The convention will kick off with a major, bold political action at the St. Louis Arch on Friday, March 18th. The rest of the conference will be held online. For more information and to register, go to uhurusolidarity.org/register. The African National Women's Organization calls on African women and our supporters to attend the Black Women's Convention, March 25th to the 27th. The Black Women's Convention is an annual gathering of working class Black women who believe that colonial capitalism must be destroyed in order for African women to be free. Because of COVID, this will be a virtual event. Go to convention.anwauhuru.org for more information and to register. Did you know a Black mother with a college education is at a 60% greater risk for maternal death than a white woman with less than a high school education? Many African women are afraid to start families in America because they know that we are dying in hospitals and dying in the streets of a country that doesn't care about its people. Black women have higher rates of C-section births, and our needs, concerns, and pain are routinely dismissed by traditional health systems. We are turning to midwives and doulas after years of feeling dismissed in hospitals. This program will facilitate our ability to take control of our health. The African People's Education and Defense Fund is looking for 20 African women who are interested in becoming certified as a doula in the north side of St. Louis, Missouri. This training will be provided for free upon meeting all criteria. This program will not only impact the women it serves, but will train women to be entrepreneurs. Economic empowerment is the foundation of the ability to create the kind of life we desire. Working for oneself allows for full empowerment because you are in charge. For more information, email africandoulaproject@blackpowerblueprint.org or call 314-334-2070. APDF is looking for a part-time project coordinator, coordinate a 6-month doula training program in St. Louis, Missouri, to improve infant and maternal health in the African community, ensure recruitment and success of 20 students following an established work plan and timeline. This position will start in early February. This is a short-term, part-time hourly position for 25 hours per week and for 6 months. Applicants must be able to work from the APDF office in North St. Louis and travel locally for networking, as this is not a remote position. For the full job description and to apply, please email africandoulaproject@blackpowerblueprint.org or call 314-334-2070. This April, the One Africa, One Nation Farmers Market located in North St. Louis will be holding weekly markets. We are connecting with Black farmers and growers to bring healthy food to the neighborhood. We will be growing food in our own garden for free distribution, providing vending opportunities for small businesses, and bringing the community together with culture and more. For more information, visit oneafricamarket.com. Like and follow the Loezi Kinshasa Like page on Facebook for more African internationalist political education. Secretary General Loezi Kinshasa does frequent live events such as the War of Ideas series. He includes live sessions done in French. To get alerts of when SG Loezi is going live, make sure to like and follow his page today. Uhuru Furniture and Collectibles in Oakland, California is hiring a full-time truck driver and full-time marketing coordinator. If you have driving and furniture lifting skills, social media and print marketing experience, and can work Wednesday through Sunday, then this is for you. Uhuru Furniture is one of the ways APDF is paving the way for genuine economic development in the African community. Apply by visiting uhurufurniture.blogspot.com. Led by Belinda Parker Brown, Louisiana United International, LUI, is a civil, constitutional, and human rights organization especially committed to eliminating unlawful discrimination in the state of Louisiana. That includes all forms of illegal bias against Louisiana residents, including those historically protected as well as the nouveau repressed. LUI is a nonprofit, membership-based organization presently operated on an all-volunteer basis. The organization's its leader and other active members work diligently to combat and expose public sector corruption within Louisiana. That work regularly calls for in-depth research and investigations, as well as statewide, national, and even international outreach. They are also a member organization of the Black is Back Coalition for Social Justice, Peace, and Reparations. To learn more, visit their website, launitedi.org, or call 985-503-0626. And we salute Dr. Marsha Coleman and the Bethesda African Cemetery Coalition. The BACC seeks atonement for past injustices, sanctification of a final resting place for first-generation free Africans in the U.S. and their predecessors who died in bondage, and the celebration of the individuals, their accomplishments, and the once thriving African community they established in Bethesda within 5 years of emancipation. To get involved, visit their website, BethesdaAfricanCemeteryCoalition.net, or email them directly at nofearcoalition@aol.com. On Tuesday nights from 8 to 9 p.m. Eastern, join Ralph Pointer on What's Happening Blog Talk Radio. Tune in by calling 347-857-3293. Ralph Pointer sits on the Black is Back Coalition Steering Committee and chairs the BIBC's Political Prisoners Working Group, and also leads the Lynn Stewart Committee. And we are calling on people to follow the All African People's Development and Empowerment Project on Facebook, or visit developmentforafrica.org for important information and helpful tips in regards to the colonial virus, COVID-19. ABDEB has an international telehealth program, a free resource for African people to get our COVID-19 related questions and concerns answered by licensed doctors and nurses through Project Black Ankh. You can make your free virtual appointment with one of their professional health providers by going to developmentforafrica.org/telehealth. To keep up with our movement events, visit theburningspear.com's events page and subscribe to our mailing list. And lastly, make sure you like and subscribe to the Burning Spear TV on YouTube to catch every episode of the Omali Taught Me Sunday Study, and support the Omali Taught Me show by donating at paypal.me/Omali Taught Me. So that concludes our announcements. Thank you guys for sticking with it. We got a lot going on. So check out theburningspear.com/events for all of the follow-up details regarding these announcements. And now we're going to get into our Q&A portion of this study. And of course, we want to acknowledge where people are viewing from. So we have Moorhead, Minnesota, Winter Springs, Florida, Portland, Oregon, Battle Creek, Michigan, Miami, Florida, Oakland, California, Chicago, Illinois, St. Louis, Missouri, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, St. Petersburg, Florida, Richmond, Virginia, Marion County, Georgia, Jamaica, Queens, New York, Gainesville, Florida, Toronto, Canada, Occupied Azania or South Africa, Liberia, West Africa, San Diego, California, Tampa, Florida, Michigan, Lakeland, Florida, Montreal, Canada, Hempstead, New York, Trinidad, Norfolk, Virginia, Huntsville, Alabama, Spokane, Washington, Brooklyn, New York, Bermuda, and Birmingham, Alabama. Uhuru, comrades, thank you for tuning in. So, Chairman, we're going to take a look at one question that came in from Comrade Kemu in Birmingham. This came in last week, and he wanted to raise the situation around a man, Ramzu Yunus, and what he's been doing in Detroit. So, Pearl.
Can you, he raised the question about this brother, and I don't know that much about him. I did Google some information indicated that he was involved in a struggle trying to, if I remember correctly, dealing with housing, and that he was involved in a real serious confrontation with the state, with the colonial state, in the form of the domestic military forces called the police, and actually had a serious kind of armed standoff with them, and successful up to now, and has made declaration that the state that they will prevail, and they're not going to be intimidated by the colonial state. And you know, I mean, I mean, you know, when we see and hear things like that, obviously it's inspirational. I just want to help everybody understand that our objective has to be the defeat of colonialism, and that sometimes if we know and deal in some strategic process against colonialism, we can win because it doesn't rely simply on what we are doing at that moment, some specific involvement, some specific campaign. In fact, we remind people that we do not believe that the movement is everything and the revolution is nothing. So the point being made that movements, even bold and daring and courageous movements and personalities, have to be consciously involved in a strategic process and conscious of a strategic process, building the kind of organization that will allow the victory in a specific instance and a specific campaign to contribute to a victory for the whole revolutionary project to overturn colonialism. That requires, we are convinced, among the things necessary for that, obviously crisis, and crisis is a part of what drives the housing and desperation that we find throughout this country, in particular in New York, I mean in Detroit. We know what they did to Detroit, that is to say the colonial capitalist forces, how they destroyed Detroit, in part because Detroit had such an incredible record of conscious resistance. Whole African working class movements developed there. And then it was also a place where Africans had accumulated what appeared to be various serious resources in terms of houses and things like that. Detroit is the place where where the Republic of New Africa had to defend themselves with guns when they were having a meeting at Aretha Franklin's father's church, and it was attacked by by police and government agents, and they actually defended themselves with guns. And after arrested, after they were locked up, an African judge who was called rushed to the jail and freed them all on the spot. So it has an incredible reputation and a history and legacy of resistance and struggle among the African working class. And so, you know, that's something we're quite familiar with, and recognize that there's a serious legacy there. And we also recognize how, because of that, the African workers in Detroit have paid a horrible price in terms of the economic devastation that has been imposed, the pushing Africans out of Detroit, taking over properties, housing, similar to what we see in St. Louis in some ways. So we are sympathetic with that. But the thing that we did in St. Louis, where we had this opportunity to go in and take the revolution into St. Louis to fight around the question of housing, et cetera, from in a way that was building revolutionary organization on the ground that has strategic objectives greater than just the housing, but tying that housing question, tying the gentrification question into the overall revolutionary project to overturn colonialism. And we've initiated projects that serve to negate colonialism, colonial domination in the process of fighting around housing and things like that. So I know that's a very long answer to what you just raised, but I just think it's important to really reemphasize the fact that we're struggling for a perspective that it's not just that the movement is everything and the revolution is nothing. The revolution is everything, and the movement, we have to intervene and deal in movements in a fashion that contributes to the revolution. Because I mean, yeah, that's essentially where I believe it, Comrade Uhuru. I don't have the ability to go over much of what that was asked about a particular comrade, and it probably would have been helpful for people who who are participating in this study to know something about that comrade, that history. And I don't have the ability to provide that for them. Uhuru.
Uhuru, thank you, Chairman. People could look up, the name Ramzu Yunus, and it, comes up. You can see kind of some of the articles. But I do appreciate, what you were, your answer to Comrade Kemu's question. So thank you, Comrade Kemu, for raising it, and thank you, Chairman. So still working to get some questions, and please type those into the chat section. I did see a comment from, and I'm raising the comment because there might be something you want to speak to, Chairman, but the name is Stephife on YouTube, and the comment, it's spelled Stephife.
Okay.
And their comment was that, I wish I could drop this presentation into every channel that keeps trying to promote China's benign intervention, even on beloved Comrade Glenn Ford's platform. So that's what they had commented.
But nobody has a benign intervention. And the fact is that our problem, while we have to be concerned about China and any of those other forces, our real problem is the organization of the African Revolution, and respecting the fact that that we have to be involved in African Revolution. There are people who we know who exist in certain parts of the United States and other places who will, on the one hand, condemn China and other forces for what they do in Africa, complain about AFRICOM on the one hand, but on the other hand, do not even recognize the fact that we are part of a single African nation with a profound contradiction stemming from the assault on Africa, and that our solution is going to be, has to be the redemption of Africa. That is the overturning of a colonial capitalist system that came into existence, a colonial mode of production that was founded off of the attack on Africa, and that this notion that somehow, in many ways, it's back to the same question we were looking at in Detroit. Somehow we can find a solution where we are, and we can yell from afar without participating in a revolutionary organization that grows the capacity of African people to redeem Africa, to take back our Africa, because everybody is coming into Africa. That has been happening for 600 years now. So the thing is that we build a revolutionary organization. That's what the African People's Socialist Party is. That's what the African Socialist International is. That's what Comrade Tafari is doing over throughout the continent of Africa, and in South Africa in particular. That's what we're doing in the Caribbean and Europe and what have you. So, so China is definitely out for Chinese interests. The problem that we have is there's no, except for the African People's Socialist Party, African Socialist International, there's no such thing as African interest. It's Ghana interest as this perceived thing, or South African or Cameroonian, and all of that's nonsensical and terribly problematic for us as a people, the African Americans, and all these other kinds of things that obscure the fact that our Africa continues to be, bled even today. And anybody who wants to, any force that wants to, can come into Africa. And the only thing that's going to stop that is an all-African revolutionary project. So, I hear this, what's being said about China and whether it's benign or not. China looks out for Chinese interests, and since the fact that the Chinese Revolution has certainly since Mao has concentrated primarily on, or essentially on development of China and functioning within the colonial mode of production, as opposed to its previous movement toward overturning the colonial mode of production, making an assault and uniting peoples and groups and organizations to overturn that. That was the old China, certainly. But today, we are looking at a China that will unite with neocolonial forces on the continent of Africa, and it does that on a regular basis, and actually initiate economic programs that makes in some quarters it makes China look good. And I think this is what this comrade is saying, Stefania, that it's not a benign entity, and nothing is. That there is no force that's working and has authority and growing in Africa that's doing that for Africa. Nobody. And the only force that's doing it for Africa is the African Socialist International. So I hope that people who are really interested and concerned about China or any other force in Africa, and especially the neocolonial puppet regimes there that bleed and facilitate the theft of our resources, whether it's through relations with China or Canada or the United States or Turkey or India or any of these other forces, I would hope that people who are concerned about that would strive to become part of the African People's Socialist Party, Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman, thank you. And I appreciate you speaking to that comment. But we got some good questions coming in. This question is coming from Regina in Wichita, Kansas. They have two questions. The first one, why not total abolition of the police? And second, can you explain further why anti-fascist movements are not truly for us?
Well, the first is that the police is an organ of the state. We used to have a party in Wichita some years ago, by the way, but I don't think we do now. But the police, an organ of the state, it is whether if there's a state there, and we have a colonial state that dominates our existence in the United States, and in fact, effectively around the world. So I'm not saying that people should. I think it's a great thing that we've seen a movement that would call for abolishing the police, because just because I think that is an assault on this whole notion of the how the police get held up as these heroic figures that always out there, and because the police is the first line of resistance to the struggle of African people trying to win our freedom, and even not just to win our freedom, but to first, the police are there to protect the status quo, the colonial capitalist relationships. So I'm not saying that abolishing the police or anything like that's not couldn't be a good campaign or a good slogan, but I'm saying that it's a poor substitute for a movement. Just calling for abolishing the police is not going to happen in the first place. It's not going to happen. It may be an abolishment of the police as it looks at this moment, but the state is not going to go away. And increasingly, the great momentum that people thought that had been achieved around this question, see, it's been overturned almost overnight as more and more people now retreating from that position. And because nobody had to fight against the colonial question. When they're talking about abolishing the police, the fact is that the police function as an army of colonial occupation. And this is the issue. When you so how do you deal with that? You eliminate the colonialism, or you make this ongoing aggression against the colonialism. That's how we say Black community control of the police. That means not their police, but it's a part of negating the authority of the colonizer by initiating a capacity for security, our own security controlled by the people of our community. That's part of what we're talking about. That's in many ways what the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense and eventually, was created to deal with. So we're not saying that it's bad to say to abolish the police. Is to say that, except in saying it, we recognize it's a political slogan. It's a political slogan that we use to expose the relationship that the police has to our people. But in the process of doing that, the police are not going to be abolished. So what do we say, in the process of exposing them? We say the most democratic response to what the police do is to negate their significance by, as a colonial instrument, as a force that's used from outside our community to attack our community, is for Black community control of the police, one. Two, the other thing, what was the other question that was raised about that, Comrade Akile?
Can you explain further why anti-fascist
So the fascism question, yeah, I mean, because the fascism is just a form of the state. So what difference does it make is if the colonizer form of the state of the colonizer is democratic or fascist if we colonize? And if people just concentrate on fighting against fascism, you're fighting against a form of the state. The state is an entity that assumes different forms. Like in the United States, it's called a democracy. It was a democracy before Trump, before January 6th, it was called a democracy. It's been called a democracy even at the time we were actually living under obvious colonial slavery. It was a democracy. So the form of the state now, so you don't have formal slavery now. You know, the Africans can vote to some extent, even though that's constantly under threat today. But you have no freedom. This whole issue of fighting against fascism is demanding, requiring for African people to abandon the struggle against colonialism, to unite with one sector of the colonizers who's in the fight with another sector of the colonizer. And that's what we see. That's what January 6th was about, a sector of this is colonizer. Here they are moving to overthrow the Biden regime, to keep Biden from being formally put forward as the president of the United States. So, wow, that's fascism. Well, Biden is the guy who's responsible for the 1984 crime bill that's locked up all the people in prison. No white people have been saying that locking up 1 million Africans in prison is fascism. Because the reality is what they call fascism is simply how the colonial capitalist system looks when you see it in its raw form. It came into existence, the whole colonial capitalist system was born through enslaving African people. It's always been vicious. And now what happens is when the crisis of the whole social system deepens, and there are elements of this treatment of African people and others around, not just Africans, Mexicans and other people, that creeps into some of the spaces that's occupied normally by the settlers themselves, by the colonizers themselves. Then what's said is fight against fascism. I'm saying we have to fight against colonialism because that's the thing. The whole system rests upon the foundation of colonial domination of African people, indigenous people, including Mexicans, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the fascism thing is a diversion. And it's not to say that the system doesn't get vicious, more vicious, that gives a more vicious expression at different times. It does. Anytime the system is in crisis, it does. Anytime the system is in trouble, you see more cops in our communities, et cetera, but nobody calls it fascism. Nobody was saying it was fascism when the police were, even during this whole period of the civil rights movement, when they were coming out with dogs and the Klan killing us. It wasn't called fascism. It was fascism when a special thing happens, when it intrudes into the existence of white people, of the colonizer, then there's fascism, and then everybody's supposed to drop everything you're doing and go fight against this fascism. And you fight against fascism, you fight against the form of the state, and you still got colonialism dominating the lives of African people. I hope that was helpful. What was that comrade's name?
Regina.
Regina, I hope it was helpful.
For real. Thank you, Chairman. And thank you, Regina, for those very great questions.
I met Barry Sanders. We used to do work. Barry Sanders was an extraordinary football player. I think it was for the Lions that he played for. And I mentioned the party had a presence in Wichita on one occasion. Yeah. Uhuru.
For real. Thank you, Chairman. And yeah, I really appreciate, you just really hammering in this understanding around the question of like fascism and anti-fascism and, how we're engaged in a struggle to overthrow colonialism. And I think there was one point that I wrote down from this study where it talked about African people as not just the commodity and the producer for colonial capitalism, and that's the first worker. That's the the difference.
Well, it's an issue that Africans often, especially in the United States, but I don't think it's exclusive. I mean, what has happened is that the world has been defined a certain way, and it's been defined a certain way by the colonizers, whether they're communist colonizers, or capitalist colonizers, or fascist colonizers, what have you. The world has been defined in a certain way. And Africans have been marginalized in history and in science and what have you. So we define the world not based on what is significant to us as a people, as a whole colonized people, a whole world living under colonial domination. I mean, Africans fought for France against the Germans, fascists, and Africans, and then at the same time, France had Africans living under colonial domination. Even today, France is. And so the French were anti-fascists, and we fought for the French, and we fought for the French, even as the French were so-called anti-fascists. They were killing people in Vietnam that they kept under colonial domination. And even I just think it's really important to recognize that when you look at how when the French, the anti-fascist French, went in Vietnam, they were keeping the Vietnamese people living under colonial domination. 70% of the soldiers who fought for France were colonized. They were from North Africa, from other parts of the French colony. So we are colonized. We're fighting against so-called for France, who was an anti-fascist country, but colonialism still prevails all over the world. More than 14 so-called states, so-called states on the continent of Africa controlled by France, the anti-fascists that we fought for. So it's a form of the state, that's all. And it misuses us, and we have to move away from that and define the contradiction as what it is. It's colonialism. It's a colonial mode of production that governs the entire planet Earth today. And we have a responsibility to overturn it. Uhuru. So I hope, Regina, that at least, whether you unite with it or not, I hope I made my point. Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman. And yeah, Regina says, thank you, Chairman Omali Yeshitela. Uhuru. So, Uhuru. All right, our next question is coming from Anthony in Jamaica, and he asks, colonialism built capitalism. So what is the relationship of imperialism to the two?
Well, empire, that's a good question. Because the word imperialism comes from the word empire. And it has been defined, differently over a period of years in terms of, and the term that most people are accustomed to and use, some consciously, some not, came about through V.I. Lenin, who was the leader of the Russian Revolution 1917, and who was quite influential and continues to be influential. Even he influences me and our party and things like that. But the term empire came, with the imperialism comes from the term empire. So during certain struggles within Europe, the issue of imperialism became quite pronounced. And Lenin, in an assault on an effort to characterize imperialism as something that within the socialist movement that is something relatively benign, Lenin defined imperialism a certain way. And he defined imperialism as capitalism that has become rotten ripe. It's the highest expression he would say of capitalism. Capitalism developed to its highest stage is how Lenin would, and we disagree with that because it was empire that created the colonial empire of the imperialists, the empires that went into Africa and all these other places, and that began this accumulation of capital resources that led to what we now know as capitalism. So we say that capitalism, quote unquote, was born through empire, and not, as Lenin assumed, that capitalism, that imperialism came through the growth and development of capitalism. Why would there be this difference? It would be this difference because Lenin was somebody who was defining the world from where he was located and how he occupied that place in the world. And he occupied that place essentially from the place of a European state, even though it was semi-feudal kind of state. And he defined the world and its development based on development of Europe, capitalist Europe and what have you. So that was the starting point for his investigation. And he saw certain things happening in Europe. And part of it was the emergence of capitalism as it appeared in Europe. And this is what they were struggling with. We're saying that our struggle began much earlier. I mean, by the time Columbus had come to the Americas, the Portugal had begun to trade in Black people in 1415. That's something like 600 years ago. And by the time, Lenin is what, became really prominent in the early 1900s. That's 500 years later. So he is defining some phenomenon that has history much earlier than what he's dealing with. So empire, imperialism, empire, people refer to imperialism, and sometimes we would use imperialism relatively interchangeably, but we recognize that the term empire, we don't mean it the same way that the Leninists have come to mean it, and many people call themselves Marxists have come to define imperialism. We say that capitalism is the highest expression of imperialism, not the other way around. That capitalism, the fact is that empire created the situation and capitalism was born from that. I know that was a rather convoluted kind of response, comrade. Who was that?
Anthony.
Anthony, yeah, I know it's a convoluted response. I hope you were able to follow it anyway. Where's Anthony?
Jamaica.
Oh, Jamaica. Okay.
Yeah.
Garvey country.
Uhuru.
Yeah, Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman. Thank you, Anthony, for your question. I think it was a really important question for us as well. And Chairman, we're winding down. So this might be the last question we have to take. And this is coming from Comrade Demetria in Portland, Oregon. And she asked, Uhuru, Chairman, can you say why it's important for African people to understand that our lifestyle is connected to the colonial mode of production and that we are fighting for freedom for Africa and African people around the world and for us controlling Africa? And then she also comments, APSP is the only way.
Thank you, Comrade Demetria. And people haven't met, this is a very dynamic sister out of Portugal. Portland, Oregon. And well, it's almost Portugal. I mean, Portland is so damn white. Portugal is probably whiter. I mean, Portland is probably whiter than Portugal. The fact is that all of the economic activity that we experience happens within the colonial mode of production. And I think it's really important for us to understand that. And I'm really pleased with the question that you raised and the discussion that we're having right now, because it's not the typical discussion when we talk about the condition of our people, the fight against racism and all the other kind of silliness like that, that it's nothing but dead end. It can't take us anywhere at all. The fact is that we do live and exist within a colonial mode of production. That means that all of the economic and political activity is dominated by that fact, that reality. And it's a mode of production that came into existence through selling African people, et cetera. And what the party offers us is a way, another lifestyle to make a way of life of overturning this relationship, this social system. And this is why you will notice that almost every struggle that we are aware of that's made a big difference, like the Garvey movement, like Malcolm X, who split from the Nation of Islam. These were, and others, even some who I would not consider revolutionaries, even though they had guns and fought around the question of national liberation. I think that this is why the government has always concentrated forces to kill, destroy, discredit, do everything they can, the efforts for African people to achieve national liberation, because the whole social system, the whole colonial capitalist system rests upon the foundation of our oppression and exploitation. And the point is that that any people to become really free, we need this advanced sector, this advanced force that makes the struggle to be free its profession. That we are professional revolutionaries. And we are all kinds of things in terms of teachers, and there are even lawyers, and there are even people, other working class people, etc., who have decided that my profession is going to be overturning this social system. It's not the easiest thing in the world, as Comrade Dimitri knows, because it requires certain protocols, and it requires becoming real cadre. It requires discipline. It requires great sacrifices in many instances, and or what people might refer to as sacrifice. And the question is whether you really make the greatest sacrifice in doing what has to be done to win your freedom, or living, as a slave in some gilded cage or something to that effect. So yeah, it's really important that we recognize that that this whole mode of production has to be overturned. There's not going to be any freedom within it. There's not going to be any liberation. There's not going to be any dignity. There's always going to be humiliation. There's always going to be uncertainty of whether you're going to be able to even live the next day. And that's going to be true whether you live in some place like Chad, in Africa, or whether you live in some place like North St. Louis or in Houston, Texas. That's the same reality that we are confronted with. And in Portland, which up until recently actually prohibited Black people from living in that area, after the area stolen from the indigenous people, taken at gunpoint. So this system has to go. And it's only the advanced sectors of us who will make that kind of commitment and have the kind of discipline and willing to do what it takes to win the total liberation. That's what our task is. That's what we volunteer to do. We have created various rules of discipline and what have you. We've created a strategy to make that happen. We've created, and we believe firmly in leadership, from the individual armed with a burning spear newspaper or a flyer to help educate masses in the workplace or in the communities that we live, or through the local party organizations and units that we build everywhere, through the regional committees, through our newspapers and other things like that. They're all committed to that end. We provide leadership to that end. We take science into the struggles of the people, and we recognize that our commitment has to be overturning the social system as opposed to trying to find a way to live comfortably within our oppression, exploitation, and humiliation. So, Uhuru, I know it's a long answer, Comrade Director Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman, but a very great answer, and I really appreciate the question raised by Comrade Demetria. And Chairman, so while we do have other questions that we'll have to take in a future study, we do have to start wrapping it up. But I just wanted to appreciate Demetria's also that comment about, APSP is the only way. And just to say, as we were going through the study and talking about what the party's mission has always been, and what we set out to do, you look around and the party's the only organization in the world that's even declaring that, is even saying that that's what we have to do and has assumed that responsibility. So I just wanted to make that point. Chairman, but we're gonna go ahead and turn it over to you for any closing remarks before we shut it down. You are muted, Chairman.
My closing remark would be really to just reiterate what you've just said. And we are the only organization that has assumed the responsibility publicly. And we do everything we can to organize around the world for the total liberation of African people. We don't believe there's going to be any separate freedom for an African in any separate place in the world, that the whole world as we know it, the oppressive circumstances, conditions that the human beings on the planet Earth experience today stem from the initial assault on our Africa, the attack on Africa and African people, and this is where the social system comes from. And we are going to have to be committed to overturning it. And that's what our party is about. And Marcus Garvey initiated the Africa for Africans at home and abroad. That was really the last most significant effort we've seen for a universal struggle by African people to end our oppression and exploitation, and the African People's Socialist Party. We are African internationalists. Garvey was an African fundamentalist. That's how he defined what it was that he believed in, and what the UNIA, Universal Negro Improvement Association, and African Communities League was about. And we picked that up. Our objective is the total liberation of all of our people, Africa for Africans. And not only Africa for Africans, but where African resources have been scattered around the world against our will, human resources, material resources in various places around the world. And we, in the process of taking it back and winning our liberation, will influence the direction of the revolutionary project globally for all oppressed peoples everywhere. So thank you so much, Comrade Director Akile, and thank you, brothers and sisters and comrades who have come on to this discussion. And I look forward to seeing you next week at the plenary, where we'll go through the entire political report and field questions and put forth how the party is going to be moving for the next several years. Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman, thank you so much for bringing this political report, this main resolution, and allowing for us to study it with you over these last several weeks. And in order to catch the last chapter, as stated, you're going to have to attend the party's plenary next weekend, so you don't want to miss it. And again, it is February 11th through the 14th. Registration is $25. You can register today at apspplenary.org. And so this is a reminder that because of the plenary, there won't be an Omali Taught Me Sunday study, but don't worry regarding your questions. If it was not answered, that they have been taken down and will be addressed in a future study. Just really want to appreciate everybody for tuning in. Make sure you like and subscribe to the Burning Spur TV on YouTube to catch every episode of the Omali Taught Me Sunday study. And that's where we'll be broadcasting the plenary as well. And also continue to support the Omali Taught Me show by donating to paypal.me/Omali Taught Me. Uhuru comrades, Uhuru chairman, forward to the party's plenary, relentless
Vanguard up.
leadership, vanguard up, Uhuru.